Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl Ames.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, I'm Chris Merrick Hughes, and you're listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Terrific. We are honored this morning, not morning where you are, but morning where we are, with this great conversation that's already underway. But for our listeners, I just want to say that you've worked as a drummer, my favorite part, and other instrumentalists with artists to include Tears for Fears, of course, for which you're probably most known here. Paul McCartney, Robert Plant, Lloyd Cole, Tom McRae, Tori Amos, Peter Gabriel, Howard Jones. The list goes on and on. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, you're very welcome. My pleasure.
Now, we've been yammering on for about 10 minutes before I went, wait a minute, have we hit the record button? So we're just going to get right back to our conversation. We're talking about artist greatness and where the bar is. And you were talking about Paul McCartney.
Well, I was just saying that, well, if we can go back a stage, I was just talking about great artists, undeniable great artists, being consistent in their work and releasing excellent album after, or extremely good album after extremely good album. And for me, there's very few. And I was saying that I thought Bruce Springsteen, across his career, most of his records are very, very good. There's a high standard. In case of Paul McCartney, who I absolutely adore, I think he's made albums for quite some time with maybe two or three things that are great, and the rest is kind of like not as good as it could be.
Okay.
So looking at well-established artists, say Elton John, for example, where they've made great albums quite sporadically, and a lot of albums which are kind of okey-doke. So that was the kind of axis of the conversation we were having there.
Well, okay. So one of the things that we were positing was that you kind of have to put up for the search for greatness, which will sometimes produce some swings and misses. And if you're allowed to swing and a miss as an artist, well, then every once in a while you run into one and you score something huge. So for the listener to tolerate that is important. And nowadays, as the music business has changed, there's a lot, I think, less tolerance for what might be a lesser hit. Or would you say that it's the other way around because we're so able to buy singles now?
I think it's a very, very interesting question. You know, listening to an album where you play a track you really, really like, quite often you get to know the track after it because you haven't got up to turn it off. And if you listen to an album from beginning to end, you grow to like certain tracks that you probably would never have given a chance to listen to if you just punched a track on a streaming service. So there's an education involved in what an artist might be doing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There were plenty of albums as we were growing up that we would listen to where there was something, way on side two that was meant to be a part of the work as a whole. And, some of that stuff was great when you gave it a long chance.
Yes, exactly so. And sometimes you had an album. Take a group like, for example, Steely Dan. I got all their albums in the right chronology as they came out. And every time their album came out, I'd be going, oh my God, what have they done now?
This is terrible.
I just don't get it. And then 2 weeks later, this is the best thing they've ever done.
Right.
That growth process is incredibly important when it comes to listening to music. And I worry about the nature of immediacy, where people listen to the first four bars and go, nah, next one, nah, next one, nah.
Yeah, we're not giving it that chance.
Yeah, well, that chance is worth it because if it grows on you. And the other thing is, as we were saying about bands and artists experimenting and taking a chance or a left turn, they're doing that stuff in public. They're putting it out for their fans, and it might not work. And you've got to give some artists credit for that,
Right. Yeah. Not just credit, but I think, we're betraying our ears now. And the challenge to the A&R guy, if there even still are those anymore, is, I mean, you certainly don't see that role where there's an artist in development. You know, they either hit the ground running and they come to the label with 1 million followers, or they don't get heard.
That's true. I think one of the things that, certainly back in the day when I was making a lot of albums, there was a close connection with A&R at the label. A&R was the A&R man was a fantastic conduit between what you were trying to do and him telling you what might be a good idea, and also explaining to the label what the band are likely to be delivering. And that quality is gone. Well, maybe not gone, but I don't see it so much.
Yeah.
The A&R guy has a different objectivity to a producer who's on the shop floor working on something. An A&R guy can come in and say, guys, don't you realize this song's too slow? It's never going to do anything. And they can be quite brutal and quite brash, but quite right. And quite often, in my experience, A&R guys would come in and say, guys, you've only got 7 songs, not 12.
Wow.
Well, they're in the marketplace, right? They're, it's one thing to be the artist, but the other person who's like, what can we sell? What art can you move?
That's true. You can look at an A&R guy from a commercial business head, and you can also look at A&R guys that have a true sense of music and a true sense of listening and enjoying the nature of a quality album.
And a true ability to identify what is within an artist that the artist may be too close to identify for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. And I think an A&R guy can sometimes deliver a home truth to an artist. Maybe you don't want to hear this right now, but I think we've gone off the boil with this idea. Or, sometimes they're brutal, but as I say, they're brutal but fair.
Well, I think a great simile, because we're both drummers, would be to say that when you're the guy who's sitting on the stool practicing rudiments, you're focused on a particular task that doesn't allow you, but does have, within the role of the A&R guy, the ability to walk in and say, this is the voice that you have that is valuable. And you can't hear that while you're sitting at the stool practicing your rudiments. So you do that and let me guide the direction of your career as a whole, because I think the world needs this from you, and you're going to be able to deliver it when you finish your task. So get back to those paradiddles.
That's a fact. Yeah.
But for us and our listeners, give us an example that you can think of an album or an artist that really absolutely developed because of their A&R guy.
Bob Dylan.
Oh, okay. So help us with that, because for the listener, there's those damn suits, they come in and ruin everything. But the A&R guy who developed Bob Dylan saw a vision for him in the long term. And how did they get there together?
Well, the guy
who was the A&R guy, by the way?
Well, we may have to just stop the tape there. Because I tell you this, John Hammond has to be mentioned here at this point. Finding Bob Dylan, unbelievably influential. The list's immense. Billie Holiday, Bruce Springsteen.
Good gracious.
Yeah, Stevie Ray Vaughan. He brought him to the label.
I think it's pretty well known that he's a brilliant and important guy. So I think that level of A&R may well have gone.
Sure. Yeah, there are no John Hammonds nowadays who are as easily identifiable. Clive Davis, guys like that, who would take an artist and develop that artist into greatness and importance, beyond being successful, but being culturally important.
And I'm sure he would have said that song needs work. That's not good enough. He would have been, as we say, in the negative. I don't just mean one of these guys that comes and goes, everything's great, keep going. I mean, they're good too, but the guys that go, stop, fellas.
Right. We've definitely seen that in some of these album fights where you also need that person in the room, because you leave, like if you leave Stevie Wonder alone or Eric Clapton, these guys are going to make their own decisions. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you need to have another adult in the room to say, slow down, stop. Yeah. You've got more work to do here.
Metallica.
And I'm not picking on Stevie Wonder, at all.
But take a band like Metallica. I mean, when they were making that album, they made the film about. It's clear they needed help.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they weren't capable. It's just that they needed someone there going,
Yeah, just to have their head above the fog and create some clarity for the guys. What about
artists when they're working do like praise? So
don't we all?
I don't doubt that those guys were going, this is great. You got it, you nailed it. Just keep doing this and be encouraging and say, yeah, we're on track. We're in the zone. And that's it.
So first off, let's just say this too. If you guys want to understand what Chris Hughes is doing now, get his album Spin It on Spotify. It's called Eirenic. And we can talk about that in a minute here, but we'll send the link to you guys in the show notes so you can go right to it and give a listen. But Chris is great. I wanted to talk a little bit about your time in Adam and the Ants. So, you're drumming in the band for a couple of years, but it's more of a pop band, but you still believe in the music you're making. What's the difference between someone like Paul McCartney, who's like, I'm really making this big art thing and trying some new things out, versus being in a band that has a different focus, whether it's Adam and the Ants or something else?
Well, the Adam and the Ants focus at that time was about pop. It was about energy. It still had a punk element, and it was for his fans and it was for new fans. And the idea was to make a raucous, highly garish, loud, colourful racket with lots of drums and lots of guitars and lots of shouting. So it was kind of, I'd say, half pop and half punk. And it was moving through that period, very, very late 70s, early 80s, where there was a slightly kind of, punky teenage market, and it worked really, really well. So making those records, they were somewhat experimental. We were kind of just being intuitive. They were done quite quickly. It was a lot of fun making them. And there was a kind of, that'll do. Put that there. Yeah, that's good. Let's do that. Put that there. Bang. And it was done. And it was relatively quick. And it's probably different from making, well, I could speak from some authority, very different to making something like Shout with Tears for Fears, which took a long time, was very considered, very multi-layered. Drums were done in a different way. And the idea behind that had a more grandiose, more message. It was a very different process. It took a long time, that track. A track like Kings of the Wild Frontier didn't take very long. We just went in and kind of knew what we were doing and
knocked it out.
Yeah.
I've got a couple things to say about what you just said, and so I'm going to hijack the show from John for a moment. But
I love a good hijack.
Yeah, well, so John and I are the same age, and I know John was aware of music at a level that I was at too, but we had different sweet spots. So Adam and the Ants was in my sweet spot, and you're 100% right. It has a punk element to it, but punk as a genre moved way far away from what Adam and the Ants were to my ear. And again, I'm a layman, but I remember that it was punk in some elements, but when you hear DRI or Pennywise, you won't recognize it as punk.
I mean, and when I say punk, I think it's important to make a distinction between a punk sound, there's a certain palette and a certain aggressive way of playing and a certain way of recording it, and a punk attitude, which is much more brattish and much more what if, this'll do, yeah, that's good enough. And it's about urgency and a different energy. So it's not that it sounds like a punk record, but it has a punk attitude in the way it was made.
And you told me a great story before we started recording, before John even got on, about Adam and the Ants and your guys' visit to Disneyland. Will you kind of give us the...
This is so dumb. So
it's hilarious, though.
We were playing at the Roxy. That day, we all drove out to Anaheim at the park there. We bought in one of the stores these kind of pirate hats. We thought, yeah, pirate hats. We'll wear them tonight. There'll be a tune where we can put them on. And they were dumb party pirate hats, not austere. Really, they weren't like Johnny Depp pirate hats. They were kind of dumb. And
the felt pirate hat you get at Disneyland and have your name embroidered in cursive on it.
Only not that good.
Prince Charming.
Only a little less classy than that. So, anyway, we were playing the show, and at a strategic moment, we all put these party pirate hats on, and it was a dumb parody of a parody anyway.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Funny. Yeah, it was great.
And then I was just struck by, as you look back in time, it's way shorter, it's way easier, but you went from being a drummer in, a pop band to producing songs from the big chair in just a matter of a couple of years.
Yes.
You guys started working on that. What a difference.
Yeah. Well, the stories, there's a short version and a long version. The short version is that when I met Adam had just broken up with his first version of Adam and the Ants. And he was hurting to get a new band together and start recording as quickly as possible. He just didn't want to be out in the limelight. The band had gone, he wanted a new band, and it had to be quick. And I bumped into him in his record company office. I'd been working on some tapes of his to edit and make better and all the rest of it. I didn't realize this, but unbeknownst to him, he walked in and said, I don't know who you are, but if you think you're any good, record us now. I've got Marco, Peroni, myself. We want to do some recordings. We want to do it now. And back in the day, things moved quickly. So I said, yeah, sure, let's do some recording. And that was on a Tuesday. On the Friday, we were down in Rockfield Studios in Wales, and we recorded some Adam and the Ants tunes. I mean, it was that quick. And I was producing. So he kind of knew me as someone that was producing. And he didn't know I played drums. Now listen, here's the thing. When I got to the whole process of how this was going to work and who was going to engineer and where I was going to go and sort that out, I thought, I don't want to drum on this session. I've got enough on my plate just getting these guys organized, arranging the tracks, making sure it's good. We'll get someone else just to come in and do the drums. And we asked John from Culture Club.
Oh, okay.
John played the drums on that session, and when we came back to London, those recordings, basically Adam got a publishing deal and then a record deal. And in the process, we auditioned for drummers, and I went down to help Adam find a couple of drummers. And I had a kit set up, and drummers would come in and I'd say, well, try it like this, you could do this, or have a go at something like this. And we got one drummer, Terry Lee, who was in the band. By the end of the day, Adam just turned to me and said, oh, man, why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? Why don't you join the band? Why don't you play the drums? And I went, okay. And that's how I joined the band, and also the level of production of those records. Fast forward a couple of years later, the last thing I did with Adam was Goody Two Shoes. He wanted to do other things, and I wanted to do other things, and I was more and more interested in production. And the opportunity to work with this very young band, they hadn't done any recording of any note, was this band Tears for Fears. And so I went and met them, and we got on. They were very different. They were much more studious and concerned with the craft of writing songs, and totally different sensibility. And we got on very well and started recording. We came to Brit Row, which is the old Pink Floyd studio in London, and recorded Mad World. And we did that in a matter of days. Then we went on and did the first album, The Hurting. So they're different processes.
This is what I like about this story, though, is that there are a lot of folks out there who are developing as an instrumentalist and get into other things. And nowadays, you have to have at least some desire to be a generalist, because not everybody's career is going to blossom in different directions like yours did, but the knowledge of other parts of the process.
Yeah, I think that's
what you contribute.
John, I think that's a very good term, generalist, because certainly with the advent of computers and working on laptops and the whole thing, even if you were just a drummer, you would have to understand about the nature of programming drum boxes, and then how computers work, and then the language of programming. And so then you start looking at things like, well, what notes does a violin play? What's the compass of a violin? Mm-hmm. How do congas work? What's the basic setting drawbars for a Hammond organ? You start to get involved in so many aspects that you just start to learn what kind of strings the bass player's using because they sound better than the last guy. There's so many aspects to learning, and you never stop.
Yeah.
And I think if you just concentrate on your own instrument, fine. But if you want to know about and be involved in more things, probably a good idea to understand the basic nature of keyboards, the basic nature of guitars.
Yeah.
They're fundamental building blocks. Simple stuff.
Yeah, and if you're a drummer, a couple things. You bring up drum machines, which, some drummers absolutely bemoan, but they teach you concepts like the importance of isolation when you're miking things, or just things that you never thought would show up in front of you. The other thing, though, is that if you're a drummer, you get hired a lot of times because a bass player or, some other instrumentalist goes, I love working with this guy.
Yeah.
He understands my process, and so we work well together. So the more that you can understand everybody else's process, just the more intelligent your contribution becomes.
That's very true. I work a good friend of mine, a guy called Gary Tibbs, whose credentials run in front of him, but he was in Roxy Music and he was in the Ants for a while too. He and I still jam and we still play, and just drums and bass, and we just sit there on a beat, on a groove, doing something, and I know where he feels the beat and vice versa, so it sounds like a cohesive unit. And sometimes if you can develop a relationship with, if you are a drummer, a bass player, or vice versa, and that can often get you work as a unit. Someone will draft the pair of you in because you play well together and you intelligently know the nature of how a song might work. So that's really important. It's sometimes being just a drummer can be slightly more isolating, but if you are part of a rhythm section and perhaps a percussionist as well, it broadens your whole hope, I think.
You mentioned John Moss a minute ago as being a guy you guys considered bringing in for the Ants. What, I can see where proximity may have had his name come up, but what about his playing did you guys like that made you go, he's a choice? Because I don't, it doesn't jump out at me.
Well, here's the weird thing. None of his playing in Culture Club, to me, reflect how good he is.
All right.
And in fairness to John, he was pretty inventive. He was he didn't just sit there and go, what do you want me to do, guys? He explained the kind of nature of it, and then he goes, well, how about this? I could do this, and I could do a tom-tom overdub. And he was proactive and creative. So a lot of credit to him, really.
Oh, that's great.
And he played well. It wasn't like it took endless amounts of takes.
Yeah, he could put it down.
Yeah.
It was one thing to have a great idea. It's another thing to execute it quickly so that everybody else can move on.
I mean, I could write a book about that, where you've got a great idea and you watch it evaporate because no one can lay it down properly.
That is terrible.
Well, it's part of the gig. You as a producer, you see that. You kind of hope that you can hold this concept.
Yeah, one of the producer's jobs is to corral that notion that, here's this great idea. Okay, don't get lost in the idea. We have to put it down.
Yeah, and also you can say to a band, it's going really well. The track, we're getting there. It's not quite in the zone. Let's keep doing it. You get to a point, you think, guys, I've got to stop you. And here's why. It's gone off the boil. It sounds like it's try hard. It's trying too hard. Let's take a break. We'll come back and listen to you a couple of takes ago. We need to improve it from there. Let's have a conversation. And sometimes you have to stop things in order for people to take a breath and work out what they're overdoing or underdoing, and then hopefully you get back in the zone. But quite often you can see it evaporate.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and I don't know if you were involved in this decision or not, I'm curious, but the horns in Goody Two Shoes. That those horns make that song. So here we have this punk rock pop song. It's like, oh, we're going to put these horns in here. Those decisions are always interesting to me. How does that happen?
Well, the desire for brass, I think, was, I could be wrong. I think it might have been Marco first of all, Goody Two Shoes is fantastically funny because it keeps shifting key every few bars. It's constant. And it's a bit like an old jazz chart where it's modulating and shifting and never staying put, which we thought was funny on some level. And the idea of putting brass on it. I think the first person I heard saying, yeah, brass, we could try brass for a change. Marco, I think it was Marco. And then it was like so straightforward. We listened to the track and I was just singing ba-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, which is like old swing, it's like taken from an old era. And then we got some players in and kind of ba-da-da'd it to them. and they got it and we nailed it. Yeah.
Back in my Army days, we were on a cavalry post, so bugle calls were a big deal. Yeah, and whenever we practiced, you didn't bring the bugler out because that guy's got to go drive a bus around post or something. So the sergeant major would stand out there and and I'm putting my thumb to my mouth and my pinky extended out like I'm fancy for the audience, and he would go da-da, da, but loud enough for 50 people on a huge field to hear it. So he played the mouth horn all the time.
And it's totally hilarious and totally appropriate.
Absolutely. At the same time, like you can't laugh because he's a boss man. No, but it's hilarious.
Yeah, I wouldn't take them.
And yeah, and he's a standard bearer. So when he played like the adjutant's call, it's like he's playing the whole thing as it will be played and loud, and you're like, God, this guy's really buying into this mouth trumpet thing.
He's going for it.
But sometimes you can watch a marching brass band and you can be exhilarated by how sharp and how smart and how important it is. But it's also hilarious as well because it's such a sort of phenomenon as it's wafting past. It's an up feeling.
If the bass drummer is able to see a commander, the commander can never be out of step.
Yeah.
And so time is a fight between the bass drummer where time actually is and the boss putting their left foot down where time has to be. And it's definitely interesting as someone marching.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So when you bring in horns, though, I could just as you tell this story, we go, okay, why don't we bring in some brass? I can imagine Adam sitting in the back of the room going, oh, geez, now I got to bring a brass section on the road with me because I got one tune.
Well, I guess you can play that two ways. You can go, well, we need to put brass on half a dozen of our old songs now.
Yes.
I mean, some people do that. They bring a small ensemble out and sort of augment what they've been doing, and sometimes that can work. I'm not sure. I think maybe Adam probably plays that song pretty well live. Without brass. I mean, I think it's probably got its own life. I never performed that song live because that was after the band broke up. So he went off and performed that. I must check out a live recording of it, whether he did put brass on it. I'm really not sure.
I think it's great and somewhat funny that you produced that song and never played it live.
Yeah, I mean, I played the drums on the track. We did that at Abbey Road. Down in the absolutely huge Abbey Road 1, and I had a drum riser and a drum kit it's like an aircraft hangar.
Mm-hmm.
I was right in the middle of it, done in 2 takes, and I just thoroughly enjoyed. Head down, just played through the whole thing,
blowing sound out in every direction in that huge room.
Yeah, that huge. And by the way, that I may be wrong. I'm sure there'll be some Pink Floyd fans that will kill me for this, but I believe the "Shine On You Crazy Diamond" call, the classic Gilmour arpege.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was overdubbed in Abbey Road 1, same room.
Whoa. See, there you go. These stories, link these things together. It's always great.
I believe it's a monumentally big sound. So I'm pretty.
Oh, for sure.
I'm pretty certain that's right.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Eirenic, your new album. Of course, everybody can spin that on Spotify. But let's talk a little bit about that. What's the genesis? What's the idea?
Okay, well, I had finished doing various other projects and wanted to take a break. And I got involved in some graphics and various other things. And I thought, I've got a few pieces of music which sort of won't go away. And they're basically piano and some sort of agitated electronics in the background. They're quite solitary. They're quite, not lonely, but they're quite reflective and they're gentle pieces. And I like to develop them and explore. And then after a while, I thought, yeah, these collectively could make up an album. And so I thought, yeah, I'll put these together as an album, and that's exactly what I did. It took me, there's some sleeve. You can get it on vinyl as well. There's copious notes about what I was up to and why I did what for what reason.
Right.
And it took about 3 years on and off, and yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed. I did it basically on my own. There's a few close friends that came and helped with a couple of balances on a couple of mixes, but essentially, I did it myself.
Nice. I'll definitely be checking it out this afternoon on my walk, because that's what I do. And so you have it up on Spotify, and that was the link we were given to share it on. What are your thoughts about having people enjoy music on Spotify? It's not the same as getting paid by a label,
Well,
having it there. But yeah,
I think the thing is that's a great question and a long answer. But I think that conceptually there's two things here. I understand the nature of finding music and listening to music and discovering things. A lot of people, including myself, get to playlists. They find it's a bit, I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It's a bit like in the old days, listening to the radio, where you kind of just sit down, listen to the radio and hope something great would turn up. And you were in discovery mode. And as a kid, I did that with Radio Luxembourg, Radio Caroline, pirate radio, even the American Forces Network in Europe. I used to, turn that on and listen to something. Wow, what's this? Wow, what's that? And I'd kind of, there'd be days when I'd just find about 5 or 6 new things. Other times I'd be wanting to listen to the Beatles and stuff I knew. And the thing about Spotify is that for me, you can go and click on something and then ramify and go off into strange places and find all sorts of musics. And some evenings I'll just find 30, 40 things I've never heard of and make notes and think, oh man, I must get this, and download it or listen again. And so as an exploratory place, I think it's fantastic. The immediacy of it is fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
No, but it gets to it, though.
Yeah, that's an aspect of Spotify. And it's not just Spotify, in fairness. If you like, most or all streaming services that have certainly got encyclopedic amounts of music.
But the playlist capability, like when we do these album fights, people that help us with it, they'll make playlists on Google Play, on Spotify, so that you can go at any point in time and listen to the tracks and kind of do the fight yourself. So, that playlist thing, you're right. That's brilliant. You can listen to, I'm sure the International Hotel has their playlist on Spotify,
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
I'm sure the International Hotel has their playlist on Spotify, And so you can go, well, what do they play there? I remember hearing a song at the International. You can play it right there. For sure, Starbucks has their playlist on Spotify.
The other thing that is great is that music enthusiasts, music opinionates who perhaps don't play an instrument, but are very deeply into the nature of compilations and albums they like and tracks this, and they're collectors and adore music. That platform, Spotify or other streaming services, offer an amazing platform to kind of voice your collections and your ideas and have people enjoy them and have feedback and the whole thing. I think that is absolutely brilliant. I mean, that's a democratized sense of music listening, if ever there was one.
I think that might be the most important feature for what they're doing, because it gives a sense of community, and it gives a sense of, it's one thing to be in discovery mode and be reaching out, and it's great to have your ears wide open and things coming in, but it's really very helpful to have somebody with a like mind and like ears to say, I dig what you're into. I reached pretty far and got this, and I think you can get there, and you can discover things that either people pushing you further in a direction, whose tastes you trust, or people who just know what you're into.
Yeah, very much. That's very true. Of people that send me links or music, there's two distinct types. One are people that want me to listen to what they're doing, and there's other people that want me to hear things they think are great, and they're not. So you get people that say, "Oh man, I heard this. You're just going to love it. You got to check this out." And it could be, a new John Coltrane album. It could be, any number of things. So I love the fact that you can get an instant recommendation to stuff, and then our whole world can open up.
Do you, when you get links from people who just want you to hear what they're up to, do you have an automatic reaction that you have to fight through? Like, oh, here's this link.
No. The process goes like this. I read the bit of text that's joined to the link, and I get a sense of whether or not they kind of mean business. And if I don't mean business in a kind of commercial, this is going to be huge, but whether they're genuinely wanting to find out my opinion or get some advice. There's a tone. You can generally tell when someone needs advice. And so I check them out and write back more often than not. Not every time, but mostly. It's one of those things. Sometimes people just say, I just want you to hear my tune. And then sometime I'll get somebody who sent me their son's tune, and they'll say, we think he's great, but we don't know whether he's wasting his time. What do you think? And you can help. You can give feedback to that. I'm happy to do that. If anyone wants to know my opinion on something, generally I'm happy to give it.
That's pretty neat. How often do you get those requests from parents? Hey, I want you to listen to my son or daughter and tell me if he's wasting his time.
Well, I get parenty ones maybe once a month. I get not parenty ones where there's people just saying I've got a track up on SoundCloud or something. That's a constant stream, a handful a week maybe.
Sure.
It varies.
It's a good question, though. I mean, as a parent, John and I both have kids that we could be asking you that question ourselves. But I am not smart enough as a parent to know. Like, I want to encourage my kids playing. If it's a matter of coaching and practice, we can certainly accommodate that. If it's a fantasy, then I need to know so I can get my kid out of this as soon as possible. But
it's a fantastic area for discussion. One of the things I always think is that, some parent will say, does my child have it? Have it, magical quality. And the first thing I often want to know is whether they can't stop doing it. If they're obsessed with doing it, for me, that'll do. They just can't not do it because they love it so much, and it feels like it's in their blood.
We just had a guy like that on the show. His show's not even up yet. His name is Hank Bordowitz, and he's done everything in music. He's been a recording artist. He's written for everybody, books, everything. He has to be in that industry. It's just what he does, and he's proven it over the last 50 years. Yeah.
If you love it and can't live without it, then probably some area somewhere will come good.
Right.
I
Right.
kind of have to believe that.
Well, and then if you're not in that vein, understand that there's some kid sitting there on his computer creating music. His mom put a sandwich next to him 12 hours ago, and that sandwich sits there ignored. Yeah. And your kid is going to compete against the non-sandwich eater, and the non-sandwich eater kid is learning a lot.
Let's call him the non-sandwich eater. Let's call him the kid with the ultimate focus.
Yeah, well, that's fine. But he's learning like those things you said earlier about what are the right string sounds to create and all these textural things that you have to have.
Yeah, I think there's this mild sense of obsession which you recognize, and that's a healthy thing. I think there's too many people that I guess think they sort of kind of maybe want to be in a band or do something, and they like the idea and they like the general sense of things, but aren't doing anything. They're not actually picking up an instrument and practicing or listening to records and analyzing them or wondering how that was done. Or, I mean, as a kid, I'd hear records and think, my goodness, how have they done that? You know, I remember listening to Good Vibrations and thinking, what on earth are they doing here? This is epic, you know.
Yeah.
And
that's a perfect example of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and some of the craziness that Queen got up to, you know, multi-layered guitars and vocals and stuff. There's endless records where I'm thinking, my goodness, how did they capture that? You know?
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's not just from a production standpoint. It's like that part, Carol Kay's bass part in Good Vibrations. How do you come up with this?
I know.
Where does this come from? And I think that when you're talking about the folks who, you know, here's the shame what I think is a shame is that there are so many people out there, and we can probably, either of the three of us can make a list of the guys who, man, I'm sure that they really had something somewhere in there and they never let it out. You know, they never worked to the point where they could kick the gate open and let the idea out. And it's really unfortunate that those folks never put their head down. In my case, I love sandwiches. So whenever one got put next to me, that sandwich got dealt with. But my ability to make my way around the drum set faster probably suffered. What do you think we're doing with technology now that allows more kids to get further and kick that gate open? Or do you think that there is more distraction in the technology that is robbing kids from the discipline of putting their nose to the grindstone? Which one do you think?
Well, it's both. I think that one of the things about music making, which is important, and it's not a technical issue, it's about performance. It's about human expression, music through human expression, and that happening live audience feeding back. And you can be musically inventive at that moment on a drum kit or whatever instrument. You can be taken by something and do something you hadn't done before. You take a risk, you take a shot at something, and it's an adrenaline thing. It's incredibly immediate, and for me, amazingly important. You can take that experience back to a studio and get involved in tech and recreate it and analyze perhaps the nature of what you've played, or get completely headlocked into the tech of it and miss the moment of live performance. On the other hand, I've just made a record I was telling you about earlier where it was essentially a computer-driven, programmed, nuanced album. To answer your question about whether it gets in the way, it opens doors. It's immensely important. And it also stifles some people and they don't quite get something that's inventive or new. I listen to a lot of EDM and lots of electronica, and I'm amazed by how there's lots and lots and lots of it, which is okay. And then some bits of it, which are astoundingly brilliant. Really good musicians have got something going.
Special.
Yeah, something special in the studio, and it's obviously banging.
How does a band, okay, maybe this is an advanced band that can do this, but U2 talks about, we talked about them off mic, because of course we did, because I love them. They say good is the enemy of great. And they have the luxury of saying, we're not only going to let great get on this album. And great isn't just a hook. It's, are the words right? Are the sounds where they need to be? What's too much, too new? And that can cripple a band that doesn't have that standard, can't maintain that standard like U2 can, because they've been doing it for 40 plus years. Yeah,
you can definitely overthink things. I mean, one of the classic things, I think Brian Eno mentioned this, is that you can take a drum track that a drummer's done in the studio, put it in a digital workstation, and then tweak it to absolute rhythmic perfection. And you get to the...
Who wants
Holy
that?
shit.
Well, the question is this. The answer is this. Probably not most people.
Right.
Because you listen back to it and you think, well, it's perfect, but it's anodyne and has nothing. There's no feeling in it. It's not even good mechanics. It's not even good craft work, if you will. So you can over tweak someone's vocals, you can over tune them, you can over precisely put them in time and ruin it, and you can get something in one take that you don't touch because it's an amazing piece of human outburst. Listen to Little Richard.
Yeah,
listen to Little Richard. They put the mic on me and let him go.
He was good at outbursts, that's for sure.
My goodness.
Yeah. Those moments that happen in the studio, and again, Brian Eno's a great example. He'll lay something down for you too, and then Larry will sit down and start playing to, in this case, and the story I'm thinking about is, a beat track that wasn't right. It was out of time. It's the song Moment of Surrender where it's like, and then Larry sits down and starts playing, and then this moment happens where they write this song, and it's just, it wrote itself. Yeah. What are your stories like that? Because surely you've experienced these things where, and all of a sudden, this song showed up.
Yeah. Well, I think the classic song I can talk about is "Everybody Wants to Rule the World."
Oh boy!
If we travel back to the Tears for Fears second album, we went into the studio to record an album, and we thought the lead up and most important track was "Head Over Heels," which is a lovely song. And we got to a point quite a long way down the line where, and this is where A&R came in, I have to say, a discussion I had with the A&R guy, a guy called David Bates. We came to the conclusion that the album was good. It was going to, it felt right, but there were songs missing. And we then started recording Shout, the song Shout. This was something that Roland had kind of worked up one weekend, and he played me it wasn't even a demo. He set up a little drum box with some clanking glass noises and bits and pieces, and he had this little drum box which went dee-dee-dee-doo-doo, dee-dee-dee-doo-doo, and he had a Prophet 5 synth with a low bass drone, and he had that little drum box going around, and he just went, he started singing shout, da-da-da-da. And I said, stop, we have to record this now. I may exaggerate slightly, but it was about 3 months. That song was on the desk being recorded. We kept changing it and adding bits, and we weren't sure if it was right or whether it was making sense. We knew we were onto something, and I did drum overdubs and programming, and took a long time. Now that song was a labor of love and took a long time. Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Once again, Roland came into the studio and he had 2 chords, ging, ging. And I said, stop. What's the status of this? He goes, I'm not that fond of it. It's 2 chords. So I had the 2 chords, I programmed them, I had a little jumpy little drum beat. And every now and again, when there was downtime, I'd press the button and a little silly little beat would come up and ding, ding, and eventually ground the band down. And in fact, Roland's wife came in and she said, "Mom, what's this?" And he said, "It's great." I said, "Tell your husband this because he's not that bothered about it." So anyway, he came back once again after a weekend, and he goes, I think we may have something here. I think it might be, everybody wants to go to war. And I said, let's just do it. Let's just write this song. Let's just do it now. And that song, more or less, came out of thin air very quick. That took from the day he came in with essentially the idea of we may have a title and the chords. It took a week to write, fully record, and do the first draft mix. So that's pretty quick. And that just came out. And I think when we finished it, we all went, wow, where did that come from? It kind of just flew out. Yeah, very fluent. That kind of, and it's funny because people that have had a go in the past of doing like a little remix balance for maybe a version without a vocal or just someone's taken the multis and they've often commented, man, this track kind of mixes itself. It just kind of flows and feels good. Yeah. So that was quick, and that all the right feelings were there when that was being done, as opposed to Shout, which was hard work.
Well, it makes my heart happy because Everybody Wants to Rule the World is my favorite song on that album. I absolutely adore a shuffle, by the way.
I do.
Yeah. To hear that it came together and it came organically, it reinforces my faith in magic sometimes.
That's good to know.
I'm also amused by the fact that sometimes the role of producer is to make the wife go tell the husband something and talk some good sense into it.
That's a producer's job, a husband's job, a father's job, a son's job.
Yeah.
It's endless, isn't it? Where you tell the right person that might have the right influence to do something that might influence something the right way. Yeah.
Well, this is what I want to say because we've rounded third base, and I'd like to end it here on this note because my favorite song is now, like I said, has now warmed my heart with its story. I didn't want to say this at the beginning because it would have been weird, but Chris, as a player and as a producer and as just your contribution to the music in my life, it's been not only a great pleasure, and it has been a great pleasure, but a tremendous honor. You're absolutely one of my musical heroes, and it's really been terrific meeting you today.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed it.
All right.
And you know what's fun is that it seems to me there's another 1,000 topics we could talk about.
Yeah, there are.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Let me do some business for you on this end. So make sure that you guys go and listen to Chris Hughes' album, at least on Spotify. It's called Eirenic, and that's why we have him here. And of course, listen to all of the other stuff he's produced because your catalog is incredible, dude. Wow.
Yeah, we're listening to it already, but listen to more of it and listen to the fresh stuff.
Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah.